IFG came into the Copenhagen process in Bali 2 years ago, so December 2007. And that was as a result of the work that we were doing on the triple crisis of climate change, peak oil, and resource depletion. And after that big event in Washington, so a lot of the folks involved in organizing it from around the world said, take this to Bali, take this. Climate is sort of the edge of it. And so IFG really invested, a lot of time and energy in trying to bring, the globalization issues there, economic governance, trade, finance, technology transfer. All this stuff is going to require recasting of global economic institutions, and we wanted to bring that discussion in. And I think there's a lot of it. I mean, certainly what came out of Copenhagen is about trade and about finance and about technology. What Obama needed and what he got from that Copenhagen Accord was something to show the U.S. Senate, here's how we're going to measure what China is doing to show that it's comparable to what the U.S. is doing, so we don't have to hit them with these border tax adjustments and start a trade war. So it's huge economic stakes. The competitiveness concerns are real within the U.S. It's at least 10% unemployment. We've had a massive removal of migration of dirty industries from the U.S. to other parts of the world, particularly China. And China is now our cheap export platform. And so this is all about the global trade relationship. And that's one of the biggest knots that, that's really what I think drove Obama to come to Copenhagen demanding that he get that, which was, by the way, not consistent with the convention. And that was probably the most frustrating thing about Copenhagen, is that the U.S. White House spin machine managed to come in and really turn the tables on things in the last 48 hours, and really shift the burden of obligations onto developing countries. And you look at Obama's own words, and that's what he says the real significance of his accord was, that it started that reorientation of the process at a time when the U.S. has yet to act on its own obligations under the convention signed 20 years ago in Rio, almost, by Papa Bush, and reconfirmed 2 years ago by Baby Bush in Bali. So this is not a Clinton, Gore, or Obama construct. This is about what America's word in the world, and we're constantly questioning what North Korea and Iran and others, are they going to say what they do? Well, are we going to say what we do? And I think they're terribly underestimating what world opinion is about climate becoming a litmus test for the U.S.'s role in the world. The world really understands better now what's at stake. Africa was just, their leaders were just livid in Copenhagen once they saw more of the science. For instance, a 2-degree rise in Celsius temperatures as a global average is about 1.5 times of that what will happen on the continent of Africa. And so they're looking at much more arable land loss, coastal areas receding, water, their crop production, just their GNP numbers. They're looking at what the economic hit is they're going to have to take at a time of increasing disease and famine and drought. And so they're holding out for more money, and what was on the table was a laugh. So it's a big concern now that the U.S. negotiators come out and called those demanding climate justice as being obstructionist, because that's really what was happening there. Is the Obama administration, together with the Danish Prime Minister, cooked up this text. They got the big emerging economies, China, India, South Africa, and Brazil, to go along with it. And it's, tried to ram it down the throat of the whole UN conference of parties, the COP, and a handful of countries stood up against that. Who were those countries? They were the folks from Bolivia who drove Bechtel out of Cochabamba for privatizing their water. It was the folks who, re-elected the Venezuelan government 3 times now in referenda at almost 80%. It was Paraguay social movements who have taken back their government, Nicaragua's who have taken back their government, and what's happened in Latin America for the past 5-10 years, rejecting neoliberalism. those folks now are their delegates in the UN conference on climate, and they stop this thing from being rammed down the world's throat. So what's going to happen with the accord now? We don't know. We're waiting to see the end of January, how many countries actually submit something concrete. But ultimately what has to happen is we need to question that process of how it happened. Because you left a lot on the table there. There's all this incredible work that happened by the working groups, a lot of which was agreed. Big area still a disagreement, but that's what's supposed to happen now is the high-level ministers and then the heads of state were to take decisions, those tough decisions. The fact is, Obama came without a mandate from Congress. He chained himself to them in terms of offering emission cuts or financing, the two big elements of a deal. And without anything to offer, he demanded something in return. And again, that's the most stunning part of what the U.S. managed to get away with. The question now is, does the world let them get away with that? We have to take the fight, we know, into the Senate for some sort of domestic decision on what are our cuts going to be and what is the support we're going to give to developing countries to enable a global deal. Obama made the remark that developing countries were saying to him in Copenhagen, about previous obligations, and he sort of he talked about it in the press as, we said this, or they told us we said that in Bali and this in Kyoto, but those things that we said were international agreements that the rest of the world understands as binding obligations in UN conventions agreed to by two previous Bush presidencies that we're bound to. So yeah, the world is going to take this. The U.S. has said they will do it. Where's the action?
Are there any other countries in the world that are taking more vigorous action that could pressure the U.S.?
China's taking vigorous action. They're rolling out solar and wind much faster and broader than we are. Their CAFE standards, what they put into green energy. So there are a lot of, and I think that's probably one of the most important ways is to shame the U.S. That the countries we're saying are being obstructionist are the ones who are now leaders. The problem is that it may be, how long will it go before it's too late in the U.S. and we're actually losing out on this new economy and unable to compete in it,
I got the impression that was solely the motivation for Obama to do anything, was that he didn't want to lose out in this new opportunity to make money in the new economy.
Right.
And that's what he said.
Right. Well, a lot of folks are going to get rich in this new economy. The question is, what are the rules going to be and how clean is it going to be? Who's going to own the technologies? Is it going to be something that's decentralizing power or centralizing power? I guess is a question we look at. But certainly the business community is a big part of the solution, and we need their thought leaders here. They've been amazingly unengaged, we see, though, in terms of, I'm not just talking about the General Electrics who are there to protect their intellectual property, but I'm talking about all the real innovation community in the U.S. that needs to be harnessed and given a platform through the UN climate process to share this information, this technology, this know-how, these innovation capacities with developing countries to transition to clean energy. That's part of the convention as well, is that we help them with the technology transfer. The thing is that there is a mutual interest that comes together with, say, the companies here in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area, the center of the clean revolution of technology. They want to sell their products around the world, share their ideas. This is how they'll get that market development. This is where the rules are being written for that new clean global economy. And we haven't really seen them, we need them more engaged in this to really help with making the case, not just the business case, but the moral case of what our obligations are and how we have to step up for those and what the mutual interest is, why it's in our interest, why there is opportunity in pursuing this, but also it's survival.
Which is my next question, just one. Did you get the impression that the leaders were convinced that climate change is real and happening?
Most, definitely. I think, from Bolivia to China to France, heads of state get it. What was the news today? That the glaciers in the Himalayas will, within 20 years, definitely within my lifetime, will be gone. The Chinese leaders get that. The Indian leaders get that. You're talking about half the world's population now out of their snowpack and ice melt, if I understood the story correctly. So they're responding, but like the U.S., they're trying to turn around a big tanker. But we definitely saw that. The question is, how do you get everybody's understanding of the scientific reality aligned with what the new political reality needs to be? Some say that what's necessary is not possible. We need to change the politics to make it possible.
Well, now, do you think that the whole process is going to continue? Some people are saying it's totally bankrupt and we're going to leave it behind.
The UN process.
Yeah, and then the what's his name, the U.S. negotiator just said the other day, well, we're going to sideline the UN and go off, and the big 5 or 6 are going to decide what to do.
Mm-hmm. They could try to do that, as they're doing with the WTO. When they met resistance from developing countries, they tried to move their agenda bilaterally, plurilaterally, however they could move it, but all towards the aim of a global consensus and a sort of a single set of rules, which I think is what the U.S. and the world will need in this case also. You do need global cooperation and participation. Everybody needs to be part of the transition, nobody left behind. So can they do some things through the MEF? Possibly. I mean, there is a logic to it. They are the biggest polluters in the world. A lot needs to happen there, but when we look at what they've produced so far, it's really nothing. These technology plans they read like a list of the export interests of the different countries taking the lead on the different plans. It's the opposite of what you are getting through the UN process, which is the developing countries articulating their needs, what are the capacities they need help with, and then those of us in countries like the U.S. building the platform to provide that with them. That's what you need the UN to do. Those are the rules. Those are the equity principles built into the convention. Specifically, Article 4.5 says we shall do that, and ultimately, even what the U.S. Needs in terms of its verification that China is doing something comparable, and other countries are doing, they'll want a UN body to do that. Otherwise, imagine the operation out of the State Department or the White House, wherever it is, to be global policemen for everybody's carbon regime. It's not efficient policing or enforcement, if you will. So the irony is, I think ultimately they will have to bring it back to Copenhagen. But again, it just confirms the point that I think the Copenhagen Accord was what Obama needed for his victory. It was for our domestic audience, and to come back home and show the Senate and strengthen his hand for moving a bill there. But what's currently in that bill is not going to enable a deal. It's still terribly misaligned in terms of what our emission cuts are going to be and what the support of technology and finance needs to be for a global deal.
So are you going to continue to put emphasis and energy into the process in the coming months?
We plan to. We're doing it already. We're planning a February 16 event in Washington with some of the thought leaders from the Global South to talk about this, from the South Center and from the UN Indigenous Forum. The indigenous issues, by the way, are the Declaration, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is in the text. It's one of the good stories that was coming out of Denmark. That was what they wanted, to have it in the body of the text and in the different operational paragraphs. Still discussion within the Indigenous Caucus, how valuable it is, what will they do with it, but it's in there. Well, that got left on the floor in Copenhagen, or rather I should say on the negotiating table. Well, Obama came in and supposedly rescued this collapsing process, the process that wasn't going anywhere because the U.S. wasn't delivering. So we're continuing to raise these issues. So we want to take that message to Copenhagen, to Washington. We're already in touch with our friends in Cancun to bring them into this. Mexico's involvement in climate issues at the international level hasn't been so strong, but our global justice allies there from the NAFTA and the WTO mobilization in 2003 are still there and ready to work with, especially with rural peoples and indigenous peoples in the Zona Maya near Cancun. And then Cochabamba is where the Bolivian government, the Morales government, is offered to host a world conference of social movements. So there's a lot of discussion now about how to engage with that, what could it be, how to make the most of it. So yeah, this is a process that has to continue. And I think maybe the other big sort of watershed thing about Copenhagen is how the global justice movement really blossomed, both in terms of its participants and its impact on the negotiations, on framing the debate, the kind of questions that were being asked, and ultimately, the outcome. It's like an unjust deal was stopped from being accepted.
So there was a parallel process, and I don't suppose you could be very aware of it since you were so immersed in the other one, but it came out, the Climate Forum Declaration.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you about those 4 main points there.
Complete abandonment of fossil fuels in the next 30 years, which must include specific milestones for every 5 years. We demand an immediate cut in GHG of industrialized countries. That sounds like the topical sentence from Richard Heinberg's Oil Protocol book about how to phase out fossil fuels. Recognition, payment, and compensation on climate debt. This is where we have the biggest work to do in the Annex 1 countries, like the US, about what climate debt is and getting support for it. Climate debt was the idea put out by Bolivia within the past year, that what's owed in terms of sharing atmospheric space and the North's taking more than their fair share is a climate debt. And there are 2 parts to paying that debt. One is what's called the mitigation costs. Okay, of all the atmospheric space, some countries have taken more than their fair share, and they continue to take more and more, like the United States. For the countries in the developing world, there's no room left for them. And so for them to have development, it's going to be more expensive. Who's going to pay that cost? That's the mitigation cost. The other half of the climate debt is what's called adaptation debt. And that's the countries who have to build seawalls, the countries who have to evacuate their populations. Bolivia, what are they going to do when their glaciers melt and there's no water and communities have to move and their agricultural production decreases. They're looking at declining revenues and GDP. And who's going to pay for that? It's damages in a way. Reparations is even the word that some are using. So that's what climate debt is. A rejection of purely market-oriented and technology-centered false danger solutions. This is something certainly we support. IFG has the whole false solutions report series that we've been doing. I guess what this speaks of is the need to better connect those different issues in the opposition to the false solutions, carbon trading, biofuels, and so on, to the UN process, because a lot of money couldn't come out of this process. We want to make sure that it goes to funding local sustainable energy and diverse economies, and not nuclear and coal, clean coal, and so on. Real solutions to climate crisis. Yeah, I think it's very related to the false solutions. We want real solutions. I think 3 of the 4 are in there. And those 3 are recognition, payment, and compensation of climate debt. I mean, you certainly have some governments talking about that. What you need now is a movement in the North to support that. So it won't move in the UN unless it moves in the United States. Rejection of purely market-oriented and technology-centered and real solutions. Those are fights that are happening in the discussion on technology transfer, in the discussion on the clean development mechanism, in the discussion on financial mechanism. That's really the backstory. That's what's at stake in those negotiations. Those will define the rules of what's going to get funded. Will they be real solutions or false solutions? So that's why it's an important process. They're very present there. What we could do better at is coordinating the political pressure in the communities that are bearing the impacts of these false solutions, and connecting them more to the national campaigns, in the capitals that are driving national negotiating positions once they come together globally. And then with the false solutions, it's really just to give space to what's working, what's building community and resilience, and making sure that funding and support is steered to those activities. We always try to position ourselves to maximize public participation and engagement in the rule writing process. Since we started 15 years ago, it was about sounding the alarm on what globalization and the WTO was about. The Doha round has been on ice for a couple years now, and this is where the global economic transition needs to move forward. It's setting ecological limits on the global economy. It's ensuring that indigenous rights are part of the solutions. It's making sure that you have equitable structures to transfer finance and technology, real solutions to countries in need. That has to be grounded in community demands, just A, for the content, and B, for the political pressure that we need to move it.
Do you sense that people are coming out of their single issue silos and uniting around this?
Yes, but not nearly enough. One big connection to make is with the folks working on financial governance as a result of the Wall Street fiasco and climate. And there's really no way out of either issue, out of either crisis, unless you solve the two at once. What's happening in the G20 with financial governance needs to include carbon disclosure and other information for investors, who are sitting around waiting, where they're still going to keep investing in coal until they see, carbon priced in. So that lack of uncertainty in the regulatory framework for investors is prolonging the economic crisis. The way out of this is to really set strong rules, send the signals to investors, and let this new economy take off. But the rules have to be in place to make that happen. Well, we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't think there was some sort of chance. But also, it's just something that has to happen. The world needs to figure this out. The problem isn't going away. The window's getting tighter, and unfortunately, people are going to die, and people will need to be held responsible for that when the next Katrina or the next disaster happens. So it's a question of really minimizing damage at this point. Something has to move forward. What the global cooperational outcome is going to be, that's the question we're interested in, and that's sort of what IFG does. We'll keep tied in with our friends at the local and national and regional levels, but what we feel like we add is really what's the internationalist response from a progressive point of view for what a global climate deal of some sort should do.
There was one of the main street slogans was that
system change, not climate change.
But it occurs to me that there is already climate change. It's already happening. It's not an either-or thing. And that will drive system change. What do you think of that point of view?
I think that's true. It has to drive system change, or there won't be none of us left for around the way we exist now, which is probably one of the outcomes is we have to change lifestyles. We have to change systems of development and systems of global trade and finance. It's really telling that was the slogan on the street that did get into the hallways. Some of the heads of state mentioned it in their speeches. So, and I think that's part of the Cochabamba meeting, is to really bring the system change agenda to it. It's kind of like the reverse of Naomi Klein's shock doctrine. Our opposition often has their plan in place, so when the crisis comes, that's the solution in the vacuum of ideas. Well, I don't know if our movement yet has that emergency plan in place or thought through. I see Cochabamba and the road to Cancun as getting us there. Will the world be politically prepared to act on that? It might depend on how many people die and how much property damage and how upset people are about it. But we need to create the political conditions and flesh out the policy details of what that's going to look like. It's unity and movement building that needs to come together at this point. And the climate campaign community, I think, works on a lot of different levels. But now is the time to really unite around all of these different solutions with an internationalist perspective that acknowledges, what our responsibility is as the most polluting country, and really how this is in our own self-interest, our enlightened self-interest. It's not just our survival; it's our opportunity, and it's the future. We just have to get more involved and focused on what we want it to look like, so that it's not a corporate solution that's brought to us, but it's something really from the bottom up.